A teacher taught a simple little boy to read. Years later, he returned a millionaire and found her crying. Enjoy the story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty playground, its golden light illuminating the solitary figure of Miss Clara. She sat motionless on a weathered bench, her tired eyes fixed on the rusted swing set that creaked with each gentle push of the wind. Her weathered hands clutched a stack of graded notebooks, ink-smudged fingers trembling slightly under the weight of 35 years of dedication. The cracks in the concrete beneath her sensible shoes mirrored the fine lines etched across her face, each one a story, a struggle, a small victory in a lifetime of service. Today was supposed to be special, her retirement ceremony after 3.5 decades teaching in this forgotten corner of Chicago. Yet as the minutes ticked by on the old clock tower visible from where she sat, the reality became painfully clear. Not a single person had come to celebrate her. The makeshift decorations she'd hung that morning, colored paper chains and a hand-lettered "Thank you, Miss Clara" banner, fluttered sadly in the breeze, witnesses to her quiet heartbreak. A single tear escaped down her cheek, catching the sunlight before falling onto the top notebook. The ink blurred slightly where it landed, creating a tiny blue galaxy on the page. She hadn't cried in front of her students in 35 years. She wouldn't start now, even with no one to see. What Miss Clara didn't know was that someone had returned to the neighborhood, someone whose life had once been transformed forever by her patient voice, her gentle hand guiding a stubby pencil across lined paper, her unwavering belief when no one else would spare him a second glance. And he wasn't a little boy anymore. The sleek black Mercedes looked absurdly out of place against the backdrop of weathered brick buildings and chain-link fences. It purred to a stop at the curb, drawing curious glances from a group of children playing stickball in the street. When the driver's door opened, a tall figure emerged, his polished Oxfords crunching over scattered gravel as he approached the school entrance. His tailored suit spoke of wealth and success, but his eyes, those were still the same, nervous, determined, searching. James Matthews paused at the entrance to the school building, his heart hammering against his ribs. The familiar smell of chalk dust and floor polish transported him instantly back to his childhood, to scraped knees and dog-eared books, to hunger pangs and second-hand clothes, to the shame of not being able to read when everyone else could. And to her, the one person who never gave up on him. He followed the empty hallway, past classroom doors with their small windows of reinforced glass, past bulletin boards with faded construction paper displays. At the end of the corridor, through the rear exit, he could see a splash of faded floral fabric, a dress he would recognize anywhere. "Miss Clara?" he called, his deep voice echoing slightly in the empty space. She turned slowly, confusion clouding her features before recognition dawned. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening in disbelief. "James?" she whispered, his name catching in her throat. "Little Jimmy Matthews?" The boy with the stutter so severe other teachers had written him off as unteachable. The boy whose father disappeared before he could walk, and whose mother worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. The boy she'd stayed after school with every day for an entire year, patiently sounding out words until reading became as natural as breathing. He stood before her now, tall and commanding, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. But those eyes, those determined, vulnerable eyes, were exactly the same. "You taught me to read," he said simply, his voice steady where once it had stumbled over every other word. "And now I've come back to write a new chapter for you." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "I didn't do anything special, James. I was just doing my job. You were the one who worked so hard. I survived because of you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And then I thrived." Miss Clara looked around at the empty playground, the deserted ceremony set up. She sighed deeply. "It's silly. I thought maybe some of them would come, just to say goodbye. 35 years in this school, thousands of children. And now, nothing, like it never mattered at all." James knelt before her, taking her weathered hands in his. "It mattered to me, and I promise you it mattered to so many others." He helped her to her feet and gently guided her toward the front of the school. As they rounded the corner, Miss Clara gasped. The schoolyard, which had been empty minutes before, was now filling with people. Children, adults, teenagers, faces both familiar and strange, all gathering in a growing, murmuring crowd. "What is happening?" she whispered. James smiled. "They're here for you, Miss Clara, every one of them." A group of men were unloading boxes from a truck parked at the curb, books, computers, art supplies. A banner was being unfurled across the front of the school building, the Clara Wilson Learning Center. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "When I left Chicago, I promised myself I'd come back someday," James explained, his arm supporting her shoulders. "I built a software company that went public last year. The first thing I did was establish a foundation to renovate this school and create scholarships for children from this neighborhood." Miss Clara's legs weakened beneath her. "But why?" "Because when I couldn't speak without stuttering, you gave me words," he said softly. "When I had no hope, you showed me possibilities. And when everyone else saw a problem child, you saw potential." Tears streamed freely down her face now. "I always wondered if anything I did really mattered in the end." "It mattered to all." "Sophus," came a voice from behind. Miss Clara turned to see Maria Gonzalez, now a middle-aged woman in a doctor's coat. Behind her stood Thomas Wilson, wearing a firefighter's uniform, and beside him Patty Chen in her business attire. Former students, dozens of them, emerging from cars, walking up from the subway station, all converging on the schoolyard. "We never forgot," Maria said, embracing Miss Clara, "and when James found us and told us about today, we couldn't stay away." As the afternoon stretched into evening, the impromptu reunion transformed into a celebration. Someone brought food. Someone else strung lights between the basketball hoops. A makeshift stage was assembled from cafeteria tables, and student after student stepped up to share stories of how Miss Clara had changed their lives. James watched from the side, his heart full. When it was his turn to speak, a hush fell over the crowd. "I was 9 years old when I came to Miss Clara's class," he began, his voice carrying across the schoolyard. "I couldn't read. I could barely speak without stuttering so badly kids laughed at me. My mom was working constantly just to keep us afloat after my dad left. School was torture." He paused, emotion threatening to overtake him. "Miss Clara stayed after school with me every day for an entire year, not because she had to, not because she was paid to, but because she refused to give up on me." The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. "There was this one day, I'll never forget it, when I finally read a whole paragraph without stopping. It was nothing special, just a simple story about a dog. But Miss Clara, she cheered like I'd just won the Olympics." Miss Clara smiled through her tears, nodding as the memory came back to her. "That was the first time in my life anyone had ever celebrated me accomplishing anything," James continued. "It changed something inside me. It made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the worthless kid everyone else thought I was." He turned to face his former teacher directly. "Miss Clara, you didn't just teach me to read. You taught me to believe in myself, and that has made all the difference. Would tomorrow bring more pain for Miss Clara? More reminders of her impending solitude? Or would this unexpected reunion signal a new beginning, a recognition of the seeds she had planted that had grown into a forest of success stories beyond her imagination?" As night fell, parents began gathering their children. Former students reluctantly checked watches and mentioned early morning commitments. The crowd thinned, but the warmth of the celebration lingered. Miss Clara found herself sitting on a bench, with James, watching as the cleanup crew, volunteers from the neighborhood, took down the lights and folded the tables. "What will you do now?" James asked quietly. Miss Clara sighed. "I hadn't really thought about it. My sister has been asking me to move to Florida with her, but I don't know, this neighborhood has been my home for so long." James hesitated before speaking again. "I have a proposition for you." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Miss Clara walked slowly toward the school building, her mind still reeling from the events of the previous day. James had asked her to meet him there at 9, though he'd been mysteriously vague about the reason. As she approached, she noticed something different. The graffiti that had decorated the side wall for as long as she could remember had been cleaned away. The broken chain-link fence had been repaired. Fresh flowers bloomed in planters that had been empty for years. James was waiting at the entrance, talking with a group of men in work clothes who nodded respectfully as she approached. "What's going on?" she asked. "Phase 1, James replied with a smile. "The renovations begin today." He guided her inside where more workers were already measuring and discussing plans. The shabby interior she had grown so accustomed to was suddenly being viewed with new eyes, not as a decaying relic, but as a space with potential. "I still don't understand why you're doing all this," Miss Clara said, watching as a man took measurements of the main hallway. "Because education changed my life," James replied. "And you showed me what a dedicated teacher can do." He led her to her old classroom, now emptied of desks and chairs. On the wall hung architectural renderings, beautiful, modern spaces filled with light and color. The Clara Wilson Learning Center will offer after-school programs, adult literacy, classes, technology training, and support services for families, James explained. "And we want you to be its director." Miss Clara stared at him in disbelief. "Me, but I'm retired. I don't know the first thing about running a center like this." "You know the most important thing," James countered. "You know how to see potential in people who can't see it in themselves." Before she could respond, the door opened and a shy-looking boy of about 9 entered, clutching his mother's hand. The woman looked exhausted, worry lines etched deeply around her eyes. "Miss Clara, this is Danny and his mom, Mrs. Torres," James introduced them. "Danny's been having some trouble in school. His teachers think he might have a learning disability." The boy stared at the floor, shoulders hunched as if expecting criticism. "Danny reminds me of someone I used to know," James continued softly. "Someone who just needed the right person to believe in him." Miss Clara felt a familiar stirring in her heart, the calling that had guided her through 35 years of teaching. She knelt down slowly, her knees protesting the movement until she was eye level with the boy. "Hello, Danny," she said gently. "Would you like to read with me sometime?" The boy looked up cautiously, searching her face for signs of judgment or impatience. Finding none, he nodded slightly. "I'm not very good," he whispered. Miss Clara smiled. "That's okay. No one starts out good at anything. We'll work on it together." As they left the building later that morning, Miss Clara turned to James with new determination in her eyes. "I'll do it," she said, "on one condition." "Name it," James replied. "I want to be hands-on with the students, not just shuffling papers in an office." James laughed. "I would expect nothing less." 6 months passed in a blur of activity. The renovation of the school building progressed rapidly, transforming the dilapidated structure into a modern, welcoming space while preserving its historic character. Word of the project spread throughout the neighborhood and beyond, attracting volunteers, donations, and media attention. Miss Clara found herself busier than ever. Though officially retired, she worked alongside James and a growing team of educators and social workers to develop programs for the Learning Center. And every afternoon, she still made time for one-on-one sessions with Danny Torres, whose reading skills were slowly but steadily improving. One rainy Tuesday, as they finished their lesson, Danny looked up at her with serious eyes. "Miss Clara, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Danny. Why are you helping me? The other teachers, they just said I was slow." The question pierced her heart. How many children had sat in classrooms feeling exactly as Danny did now, judged, dismissed, written off before they'd even had a chance to begin? "I'm helping you because I see how hard you're trying," she answered honestly. "And because I know that with the right support, you can accomplish anything you set your mind to." Danny considered this, his young face thoughtful. "Like Mr. Matthews? He told me he couldn't read good either when he was my age." Miss Clara smiled, exactly like Mr. Matthews. That evening, as she prepared to leave, she found James waiting for her in the hallway, a serious expression on his face. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "I need to show you something," he replied, leading her toward the main entrance. Outside, despite the rain, a crowd had gathered. Former students, community members, current pupils and their families, all standing together beneath a sea of umbrellas. At James's signal, someone pulled a cord, and the tarp covering the new sign at the entrance fell away. "The Clara Wilson Learning Center," it read in elegant bronze letters, and beneath, in smaller text, "Believing in potential since 1987. Miss Clara's hand flew to her mouth as applause erupted from the crowd. "Oh, James," she whispered, "I don't deserve this." "You deserve this and so much more," he replied. "But this isn't just about honoring you. It's about creating a legacy that will continue changing lives for generations to come." As if on cue, Danny Torres pushed his way through the crowd, his face alight with excitement. Miss Clara, I read a whole chapter by myself. Tonight, Mom timed me and everything." The simple joy in the boy's voice, the pride in his accomplishment, it was everything that had sustained her through 35 years of teaching. Perhaps this next chapter of her life wouldn't be so different after all. But as full as her heart was in that moment, Miss Clara couldn't help wondering, would this newfound purpose be enough to fill the void left by her retirement? Or would the challenges of building something new prove too overwhelming for someone her age? The grand opening of the Clara Wilson Learning Center was scheduled for the first day of summer. As the date approached, Miss Clara found herself working longer hours, determined that everything should be perfect. Though James repeatedly urged her to pace herself, she brushed off his concerns. "I've been working hard my entire life, James. I'm not about to stop now." But the truth was she was exhausted. The physical demands of the renovation, the emotional weight of suddenly being thrust into the spotlight after decades of quiet service, the pressure of living up to everyone's expectations, it was all taking a toll. Yet she pushed on, fueled by a mixture of dedication and fear. Fear that if she slowed down, people would realize she wasn't the extraordinary person they believed her to be. 3 days before the opening, Miss Clara collapsed. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes in the hallway. Miss Clara lay against white pillows, looking smaller and more fragile than James had ever seen her. "Mild heart attack," the doctor had said. "She needs rest, absolute rest." James sat beside her bed, watching her sleep, feeling an echo of the helplessness he'd experienced as a child, when circumstances beyond his control had threatened to determine his fate. But he wasn't a helpless child anymore, and he wouldn't let Miss Clara face this alone. When she finally opened her eyes, her first words were, "The opening will be postponed," James finished firmly. "Your health comes first." "But everyone's counting on me," she protested weakly. "They're counting on you to get better," he corrected. "The center will wait." For the first time since he'd known her, Miss Clara looked defeated. "Maybe this was all a mistake," she whispered. "Maybe I'm too old to start something new." "That's not true," James replied. "But you don't have to do it all yourself. That's what community means, supporting each other." She turned her face away, and he could see she was fighting tears. "I've always been the one taking care of others. I don't know how to let people take care of me." The admission cost her dearly, he could tell. This proud, independent woman who had stood alone at the front of a classroom for 35 years, who had faced down budget cuts and apathetic administrators and troubled children with equal determination. "Then it's time you learned," he said gently, taking her hand, "because there are a lot of people who want to return the favor." He wasn't exaggerating. Throughout Miss Clara's recovery, a steady stream of visitors filled her hospital room and, later, her small apartment. Former students brought food, flowers, books, and stories. Current pupils made cards and drawings. Danny Torres came every Tuesday and Thursday with his mother, reading aloud from progressively more difficult books with growing confidence. The outpouring of love was overwhelming. For someone who had lived so quietly, so focused on giving, rather than receiving, it was a revelation to discover just how many lives she had touched, and how deeply. "I never knew," she confessed to James one afternoon, as he helped her sort through yet another delivery of get-well cards. "I never realized they remembered." "Of course they remembered," James replied. "You can't pour that much of yourself into others without leaving a mark." Have you ever had someone believe in you when you couldn't believe in yourself? Someone who saw potential where others saw only problems? Someone whose simple act of caring changed the course of your life? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. As weeks passed, Miss Clara's strength gradually returned. The doctors advised a cautious approach to resuming activities, but they couldn't dampen her renewed determination. The learning center's opening had been rescheduled for the fall, coinciding with the beginning of the school year. "It's actually better this way," James assured her. "Gives us more time to get everything perfect." But Miss Clara had experienced a shift in perspective during her recovery. "Perfect isn't what matters, James," she said. "Connection is what matters. Making sure every child who walks through those doors feels seen and valued, that's what will make the difference." The transformation wasn't just in the building or in the programs they were developing. It was in Miss Clara herself. She began delegating responsibilities, recognizing the strengths in others, rather than trying to shoulder every burden alone. She listened more and directed less. And slowly the learning center began to take shape, not as one woman's vision, but as a community effort. One particular change surprised everyone, most of all, Miss Clara herself. After watching Danny Torres's mother struggle to help with his homework while juggling her job and younger children, Miss Clara suggested adding parent support services to the center's offerings. "Many of these children come from homes where parents want to help, but don't know how," she explained to James. "Or they're working multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. What if we created a space where parents could learn alongside their children?" The idea took off, expanding to include parenting classes, job skills training, and community resource connections. What had begun as a simple after-school program was evolving into something much more comprehensive, a true community center that addressed not just educational needs, but the whole ecosystem surrounding each child. Would this expanded vision succeed, or was Miss Clara setting herself up for disappointment by trying to solve problems beyond the scope of education alone? As summer faded into fall, the Clara Wilson Learning Center prepared for its official opening. The renovated building gleamed in the September sunshine, its classrooms stocked with new books and supplies, its computer lab filled with state-of-the-art technology. What had once been a neglected playground was now a vibrant community garden and outdoor learning space. On the evening before the opening, Miss Clara stood in her old classroom, now transformed into a cozy reading nook with comfortable chairs and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She ran her hand along the spines of the books, many of them favorites she had read to generations of students. "Nervous?" James asked, entering quietly behind her. "A little," she admitted. "It's all become so much bigger than I ever imagined." "That's how change works," he replied. "It starts small, with one teacher believing in one student, and it grows." Miss Clara turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, James, not just for all this," she gestured around them, "but for coming back, for remembering." "I never forgot," he said simply. "How could I?" The opening. Day dawned bright and clear. Miss Clara arrived early, wanting a quiet moment before the festivities began, but to her surprise, the sidewalk in front of the center was already lined with people waiting for the doors to open. Families with young children, teenagers, elderly neighbors, recent immigrants alongside lifelong residents. The diversity of the crowd reflected the neighborhood itself, a community that had faced challenges but remained resilient, bound together by shared hopes for a better future. At precisely 9 o'clock, James handed Miss Clara a large brass key. With trembling hands, she unlocked the front doors and welcomed the community into their new learning center. The day passed in a blur of introductions, tours, demonstrations, and celebrations. Children explored the new library and computer lab. Parents signed up for classes and support groups. Community organizations set up information tables in the multi-purpose room. In the midst of it all, Miss Clara found herself drawn to the reading nook, where Danny Torres was showing a younger child how to use the digital catalog to find books by topic. "See, you just type what you're interested in, like dinosaurs or space, and it shows you all the books about that," he explained patiently. The sight of Danny, once so shy and defeated, now confidently helping another child, brought tears to Miss Clara's eyes. This was why she had become a teacher all those years ago, not for recognition or reward, but for moments like this. witnessing a child discover their own capabilities and then sharing that discovery with others. As the day drew to a close, community members gathered in the auditorium for the official dedication ceremony. James spoke eloquently about the center's mission and vision. Local officials praised the public-private partnership that had made it possible. Former students shared memories of Miss Clara's influence on their lives. When it was her turn to speak, Miss Clara approached the podium slowly, surveying the sea of faces before her, so many of them familiar, so many brand new. The journey that had brought her here, from lonely retirement to renewed purpose, seemed both improbable and inevitable. "Teaching was never just a job for me," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It was a calling, a belief that within each child lies infinite potential, waiting to be discovered and nurtured." She paused, finding James's encouraging smile in the crowd. "I thought retirement meant the end of that work. I was wrong. What I've learned these past months is that the work of building a community, of supporting one another, of believing in potential, that work never ends. It just takes new forms." Around the room, heads nodded in agreement. "This learning center isn't about me," Miss Clara continued. "It's about all of us. It's about what we can accomplish when we come together. It's about creating a place where everyone, regardless of age, background, or circumstance, can find the support they need to grow and thrive." She gestured to the children scattered throughout the audience. "These young people are our future. Hand together, we're going to make sure it's a bright one." The applause that followed was thunderous. But the moment that touched Miss Clara most deeply came after the ceremony, when Danny Torres approached with his mother and younger siblings. "Miss Clara," he said earnestly, "I want to volunteer here, to help other kids like you helped me." The circle was complete, the student becoming the teacher, the one who had been helped now reaching out to help others. This, Miss Clara realized, was the true measure of success, not buildings or programs or recognition, but the continuation of care and commitment passed from one generation to the next. In the months that followed, the Clara Wilson Learning Center became a vibrant hub of activity. Children came for after-school programs, adults for literacy classes and job training, families for community events and resource connections. Miss Clara was there nearly every day, not trying to do everything herself anymore, but guiding, supporting, and continuing to believe in the potential of everyone who walked through the doors. One December afternoon, as snow fell softly outside the windows, James found her in the reading nook, listening as Danny read to a group of younger children. She looked up as James approached, her face serene. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "More than that," she replied, "fulfilled." Later, as they shared a cup of tea in her office, James revealed his plans to replicate the Learning Center model in other underserved neighborhoods. "We've created something special here," he said, "something that works. Why not expand it?" Miss Clara smiled. "From one classroom to a center to a network. Who would have thought?" "You planted the seed," James reminded her. "You showed one struggling boy that he mattered. And from that single act of kindness, look what's grown." She shook her head, still amazed by the journey. "It's never about the grand gestures, is it? It's about the small moments of connection, the daily choice to see the best in others even, when they can't see it in themselves." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the neighborhood in a blanket of white. Inside, warmth and purpose filled every corner of the building that bore Miss Clara's name, not as a monument to the past, but as a living testament to the power of belief. For in the end, that was Miss Clara's greatest legacy. Not the building, not the programs, not even the children she had taught. Her true legacy was the ripple effect of belief, how her faith in one child had led that child to believe in himself, which in turn led him to create opportunities for countless others, to discover their own potential. And as she sat there with James, watching the snow transform the familiar landscape into something new and beautiful, Miss Clara knew with absolute certainty that this was not the end of her story, but rather the beginning of something even more wonderful than she could have imagined. "You know," she said softly, "retirement turned out to be the start of my greatest adventure." James smiled. "I think your greatest adventure has been teaching all of us what it means to truly see one. Another. Miss Clara nodded, her heart full. And that, she whispered, is a lesson worth spending a lifetime to learn. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.